Michael D.
Keep it down, Tom.
Craig Nobody.
Correct.
15 minutes.
Count Corla, I'm happy on behalf of the Labour Party to support this motion. And I'd like to state very clearly the position of the Labour Party consistently in relation to the blockade of Gaza. The blockade of Gaza is illegal. The blockade of Gaza is not only illegal, but the efforts that are made to frustrate the breaking of the blockade of Gaza in international waters are themselves illegal actions. And what is at stake in our discussion is the status of international law, maritime law. What is at stake is our own credibility, because indeed, as I listened to the last speech, we have made many speeches about the Middle East, many speeches about the position of Gaza. But this week, we have reached a turning point. There are a set of conditions laid down in this motion that is agreed by all of the parties in this House, as I understand it. And if they are not met, for example, if the principle of an international inspection is not acceded to, if, in addition to that, the ship, the Rachel Corrie, which has no Hamas members aboard, which has no guns aboard, and which the content, the cargo of which has been inspected, is impeded, interfered with international law, if Irish citizens are illegally arrested and moved to a port or to a destination for which they had no intention of setting out, that in itself is illegality piled upon illegality. And it will fall to us to take action. And that action should ideally be in concert with our other member states of the European Union. Now, I support the Minister and have consistently supported on behalf of the Labour Party when he uses the phrase collective punishment. And I do so very carefully. For example, the 4th Geneva Convention, Article 33 provides, inter alia, quote, no protected person may be punished for an offence he or she has not personally committed. Collective penalties and likewise all measures of intimidation or of terrorism are prohibited. That is the position in international law. Therefore, it is very interesting when we looked at Operation Cast Lead, which led to so many deaths. When we looked at that, there was always a requirement to draw a distinction between military action and the position of civilians. That has not been respected. The distinction, for example, is very interesting, is not only should there have been the principle of distinction, but the principle of proportional action in relation even to what were regarded as military targets. But far beyond that, there are other considerations, for example, the destruction of civilian infrastructure. The knocking out, for example, of an ice cream factory a few hundred metres from inside the border in Gaza. The interference, which is incredible, with such electricity installations as are necessary for sewerage, water facilities, mills, for example, for the provision of flour, and so forth. And the continual after that destruction, which gave no recognition to the principles of civilian distinction, to proportionality, to the international law. There was then the succeeding notion that one could install a blockade against the principles of international law and seek to punish an entire population. I visited Gaza in the 1980s for the first time. I was there in 2005, a few weeks after the withdrawal of Israel, with Andreas van Acht, former Dutch Prime Minister, and others. And I was there just on the last occasion that the Joint Oireachtas Committee visited. On that last occasion, we could see children playing on tops of piles of rubble. We could see, as well as that, the evidence of houses which could be finished, replacement housing, which could be finished. They needed roofs, slates, and so forth. The money was there in what had been pledged by the region to enable reconstruction to take place, and that was being impeded. I am sick and tired of listening to the suggestion that there is a regular flow of supplies into Gaza from Israel. John Ging, one of the most respected servants we have that we should be proud of in Ireland, who has put his life at risk to run the United Nations Relief Works Agency, has consistently stated what is required to provide housing, to provide medicine. And we're talking about 1.1 million people, 56% of whom are children. 80% of whom are unemployed, and more than 70% rely on international aid for their food. I think, when I often think about it, when I went first in the 1980s, there were people there who had been there in refugee camp. About 70% of the people in Gaza are in fact refugees. And I remember an old woman saying to me, what will I tell my grandchildren? And her grandchildren are now the people who are in Hamas. And the point is, if you could point to your father and your grandparents and you say, we have achieved nothing, what kind of situation are you creating? But I also want to make a further point. I have always said it was a disaster to have a general proscription of talks with Hamas. I do not speak for Hamas, but I know that Hamas, at the time of its proscription by the European Union, a very bad decision taken by heads of mission rather than by ministers at its time in the European Union, one of those unaccountable decisions, was a mistake, because there was a division within Hamas between the political wing and those who were in favour of military action. And the proscription stopped the evolution of talks that might have taken place and created an atmosphere for peace. And we will end up in the European Union talking to Hamas anyway. Now, what has taken place this week, if we're not going to waste, if you like, and the response that we should have morally to the loss of 9 lives, is that we should realise that statements aren't enough. There have to be actions, such as, for example, diplomatic actions and actions in concert that will force on a real discussion in relation to peace. I think that when I think again in relation to where we are about that, I don't want to appear foolish, but even when a facility, a school run by the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, was bombed during the Operation Cast Lead, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands and Romania refused to issue a statement condemning the action. On the other hand, and it is to their credit, 5 states, Belgium, Cyprus, Greece, Ireland and Sweden, immediately issued statements condemning the action. So I don't underestimate the task that is there within the European Union in achieving a common position. But I'm saying we can't wait any longer for the common position. And the common position is something as well. Let us now, between now and next Thursday at 1:15, when Ambassador Everine appears before the Foreign Affairs Committee, I really want us to say, people like myself have always condemned, for example, I've been in Sderot, I've seen the rockets that were fired there, and I have condemned the firing of rockets at any civilian population. That too is a breach of humanitarian law. And it makes no sense as well that Hamas, for example, who are holding Gilad Shalit, a young Israeli soldier, would deny access to him in relation to the Red Cross or whatever. That's our position. But we regularly now at the Foreign Affairs Committee go back to the position that where those of us who are in favour of international law, those of us who are against the blockade, those of us who want talks to open and to include the political wing of Hamas, those of us who are against the evictions in Jerusalem, against the extension of settlements in the occupied territories of the West Bank, or who are in favour of increasing a flow of necessary materials to Gaza, are somehow or another presented as some kind of uncritical support of terrorism, or at least on the fringes of it. We are no such thing. But what we are against, and I have to say so unequivocally, no country has the right to set itself above international law. No country has the right to say, now let's be clear what's here. We had this discussion in the early days of the Iraq War. It was the abuse of the principle of a preemptive strike. What people are saying outside of the United Nations Charter, and saying in an abuse of the United Nations Charter and in an abuse of international law, is that we have the right to decide what is a threat. We have to decide, we have the right to interpret intentions at the point of departure in such a way as will enable us to make a strike in international waters which will lead up with the loss of life that is involved. This has no status. None at all. If people want to look at, for example, the discussions that are taking place on the Iraq War in the neighbouring island of the United Kingdom, they will see it has no basis in law. None whatsoever. So what you are saying, how parliaments are challenged this week in Europe, is to watch on and watch law being debased, watch political language not meaning anything anymore, watch somehow or another people being murdered in the high seas, watch children continue to be starved, and so forth. Watch humanitarian actions mocked. That's what's at stake. So what happens now? When Dennis Halliday spoke to my home this morning at 6:30, he was simply saying, we are not seeking a confrontation. We want to go with the Rachel Corrie. We want to take the cement that we are carrying, the school books, the school supplies, and all of the things, and then we want to return home peacefully. Now, if Israel interferes with that, either in the waters of international waters or in the waters adjacent to Gaza, it is deliberately saying that it doesn't care tuppence about us, the European Union, international law, or humanitarian need. If that is the case, it is important that before this House goes into recess, that we reply appropriately. I have every confidence in the Minister in doing that. I have said that that is why it is included in this resolution here, that he will take such diplomatic actions as are appropriate, responding to this incident and responding to the situation in which we may find ourselves. I hope that it doesn't come to be like that. I would like to hear next Thursday that there will be acceptance by Israel of an international inquiry, that there will be acceptance of that this is such a tragic loss as should not be lost as an opportunity to resume real and meaningful talks, that there will be opening of the ending of the blockade to Gaza, that there will be the supplies that are necessary, that there will be cooperation with the United Nations Relief Works Agency, that there will be an end to the attempt to blacken people like John Gay, that there will be respect for the intentions of those who in fact actually want to assist in a humanitarian way. And there will be an end to the attempts to try and blacken by association this suggestion that people, for example, who are involved in these particular activities are somehow or another supportive of any kind of terrorist action. We must not waste this week. We must, out of the tragic blackness of all of this, seek to do something very positive it will honour international law, honour parliamentary decisions, honour the decent people of Europe who perhaps now will acknowledge that they should have acted earlier. And I hope that that is what will come out of all of this. That is why I'm happy, on behalf of the Labour Party, to say as an international party committed to international peace, to say we are happy to support this resolution.